Well, good morning, fam. It is another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart, and it's not just your average episode. It's not your Monday through Thursday episode. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer after an hour of our discussion today. It's also Good Friday for those who are so disposed to celebrate Easter and celebrate Good Friday. And for those of you who, if that is the case, as it is with me, blessed be God, and let's have a great weekend and come back next week feeling renewed, feeling as if we have been resurrected, knowing that our ashes can never keep us down. We are meant to fly. So, fam, we had to bring in the big guns today. I mean, Sharif is usually big guns enough for Freedom Friday, but we thought we had to even bring in bigger guns this week because of our topic. So if you were with us last week watching Freedom Friday, our show, we talked a lot about, well, first of all, let me just say this. We talk a lot about everything in education on Freedom Friday, but we rarely get around to principles. And that's what we said last week. We said that there is all this heat for teachers. Teachers are not culturally competent. Teachers are not well prepared. They're not well trained. They're not well supported. They are, there's this narrative in the public that we follow along when we talk about education. It's amazing to me how we never get around to the building leader. I can remember years ago someone saying to me, well, Chris, every wolf pack runs at the pace of its leader. Mm-hmm. I remember thinking, well, that's kind of a weird, you mean we're giving our kids to wolves? Well, damn, that don't seem right, but sometimes. But what she was saying to me as an educator herself, as a teacher and an educator herself, what she was saying to me is what I'm saying today. Because you don't know much about principals and what they do and the science and the importance of instructional leaders, you don't talk about it because you don't know about it. So Today, let's know a little bit more. We have Dr. Kelli Seaton with us, famous in my world for many reasons, but one for a piece that she wrote a few years ago about white tears in the classroom and in schools, which I don't know about all this other stuff that we talk about in education, but I do know about the tears in schools and how they're weaponized against our people. And I think I was waiting for somebody to come along and say, snap out of it. We got kids to teach. So, Dr. Seaton, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Sharif, how you doing, brother?
Good. Glad to be here. Glad to have Dr. Seaton, back on the show. I'm glad to be around this time, so it's good stuff.
I should say for the self-determination is alive and well in this program this morning. I should say this for people listening and watching. Sharif was eating eggs this morning, as I might eat eggs today, but my eggs come from Costco, and Sharif's eggs come from the backyard. So all of us should be so self-sufficient as this brother. All right,
well, be able to feed yourself.
Well, I mean, listen, grow your own whatever, but you have property, you have land, so you're one of the free Black folk. So not all of us could do what you can do. So anyways, let's jump right in and let's talk about it. I think where I would love to start is for people who don't live in the work every day is the importance of an instructional leader, or even if I have that wrong, a certain type of principal. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that we have when we think of just the guy in charge in the building versus what they really should be for the teachers and for leading a building? Like, what is so important about that role, and what makes a person good at that role? Like, where do we want to get to for people in that role? And I'll kick it out to either of you.
Yeah, go ahead, Seaton. Seaton. Let me just give a little context. So Seaton and I were principals at the same time, and I was always just like a deep admirer of like how she led, how she thought about things, how she thought about development and all of those type of issues, which is just really important. I just don't think it gets enough play. But I'd love to hear her kick this conversation off as a master level principal who led Turnaround School, who Obama's quoting in the
what
in his speeches. Yeah, listen. If you go to the Black History Museum, what do they call it? The Black Smithsonian in DC, Seaton's picture is in there.
What?
Yeah,
Really?
Seaton's pictures in there. Yeah, so don't play. Like I want y'all to know, like this is, we talk about the big guns. This is a real deal.
Well, I appreciate that and the affirmation. I will in turn affirm Sharif that what I admire so much about him is his community connection and partnership building, which for me wasn't one of my strengths, right? And I think that's something that schools absolutely need to support families and children. So I just want to say that before I attempt to answer the question. So I think in my estimation, the traditional view of the principal is managing the building and managing discipline. Mm-hmm. So very much this orientation of those two things, and instruction is kind of left to teachers and maybe to the central office to support folks indirectly. I actually think that the principal should be an instructional leader, should be, well, first of all, they have to know what their strengths are. And I think depending on the structure, depending on the support the principal has, that determines, I think, like how they operate. Unfortunately, in some schools, there's a principal and an assistant principal. Sharif and I come from a district where we had much more support. We had culture, special ed, instruction, and operations. I think that allowed us, and Sharif, you can speak more to this, I think that allowed us to really have a laser sharp eye on each of those and to support the building in that way, right? It was a strong coaching culture. I think that principals are expected to do things that, like be an instructional leader, go in classrooms and give feedback, coach teachers, coach your team, but they're also expected to do all of these other things, right? And so part of it is, do they have the capacity to do it? I think the other thing is, do they have the skill, will, and mindset to do it, right? So if you have the capacity, are you able to do it, right? Are you motivated to do it? Do you believe it should be done? So that's skill, will, mindset. Then I think the next layer is, we're talking about principals. It's who are the principals managers, right? Because if we're talking about the capacity of the school or the possibility of the school aligns to the principal, the principal reports to someone who should be coaching and developing them. And I think for the principal's manager and for the principal, they're often just not given, if they have capacity, right? And then they don't have the skill, I don't think folks are developed. So they should be an instructional leader. They should be in classes, supporting classes, knowing about data, knowing about what's happening with children and families. But they got to have the capacity to do it, and they have to know how to do it, be willing, and believe that it should be done.
Where do they come from? When we think about teachers, we always talk about their prep, and we always talk about their prep not being great. What's up with principal prep? Where do they come from? Do we have any of the same type of data that we have with teachers?
I'll hit that to Sharif.
Yeah, I mean, I read once that the data around principals, that a significant number, an outsized number, a disproportionate number of principals are actually PE teachers. And so that was one of the interesting things that was just like, how does it end up, where that is, thinking about all the things. And I don't know if that rings true today. This was, when I was going through my principal cert program at Cheney, there was, some data that was shared. And I just found that, interesting at the time. I do think, and I think things have changed, but when we did this principal ambassadorship at the Department of Ed, one of the things that we used to really talk about was principal leadership and principal support, principal training. Like, how does it happen? There are some folks who say, like, you know what, they were like, oh, I'm just looking to be a boss. I'm just looking to lead the classroom. I'm just looking to be in a position, right? Like, and so, whether it's ego or whatever it is that drives someone, to do that, like that was a lot. But then also, where do they get training? So I think if we know that teachers aren't being trained well, it would be illogical to think that principals are automatically trained well. Some of them are, most of them are former teachers who had not been developed well, and now they just have more positional authority. And so you continue that thread. What that happens is you just start having more of an influence. So before, you were messing up one pot, you had one pot, one classroom, you just messing that up. Now you got 20 pots, or however many classrooms that are in. And so that's the impact, right? And like, so they were talking about, like, yes, the the single most important factor in student achievement in the building is a teacher. However, the principal, because they have influence on all of the teachers and their support and their development and the policies and procedure, all of that, that means their influence is colossal as well. So that combination, and I really think it's really in between there too. Your school's leadership team is what determines how good your school is, right? That's the principals and its leaders, whether teachers or other positions in the building. Like, for me, that's everything. Like, that is everything. And, you tell me how good your school is going to be. Show me your leadership team and what they do, what skills they bring to the table.
I have a sense when I think about principals and when I see them that they've got like 80 jobs.
Yeah, right? you got to know instruction and you got to know where the rock salt is. But that's not the right way, right? Like, I don't want to know where the rock salt is. I just want to know that it's going to be taken care of and someone's accountable for it. I'm not looking for the rock salt. Like, I'm I got other priorities right at that moment, and it has to be done, right? It's still got to get done.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a school called Wilson in New Orleans that was taken over by Jamar McNeely's group, Inspire NOLA. And one of the things that I noticed, I had a meeting there, and then I had a meeting there once, and then I had a meeting there not long after. And the second time I was there was gardens, and the place had been painted, and the floors had been resurfaced and redone, and whatever. And it amazed me I'm only bringing that up, the number of things that a principal taking over a school thought of as important. Everything from the instruction and how we're going to teach and how we work with our teachers and collaborate, down to are we going to beautify the building and make sure the floors look good and all that stuff. And I just thought, man, that's just too much work. That's like 24 hours worth of work right there. And who's signing up for that? I just don't know.
Well, it's instruction and culture, right? Like the things you're bringing up, a lot of it is around culture. And now all that's not necessarily taught in principal development. One of my mentors said, hey, every year do something to beautify your building. Don't wait for the central office. Don't wait for, like, every year, take a little bit out of your budget and say, you know what? Hey, community, how do we want to beautify our space? Because folks from downtown, it might be, hundreds of people there. Maybe one person comes, or maybe two. Right? It's your space. You're there 200 plus days a year, right? Treat it that way. And I think that kind of, Seaton talked about mindset, that speaks to that.
We have two questions here. So one from Michelle Johnson. She asked, can a principal be an instructional leader when they know little about brain, learning science, and instruction? I feel like as a layperson, I can answer that one. But I think she might be asking that a little bit rhetorically about, like, maybe she's saying Dr. Phil says like 80% of questions are actually a statement. So I think maybe this might be a statement that many principals don't know what they need to know about brain and learning science and instruction. Is that your guys' take? Is that what you've seen in principals?
Seaton, jump in there.
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I would say there are always opportunities for principals, for people to continue to learn, right? So even if I don't know anything about the brain, I can certainly learn something about the brain, right? I would also say typically these schools that have a lot of like power behind them, like lots of people, central office, that are thinking about an instructional model and the teacher practices that yield the highest outcomes, oftentimes that thinking about the brain has been done prior to schools receiving this instructional model. So an example would be like, how do you check for understanding? Like checks for understanding, just as an example, and there's several ways to do that. So the principal doesn't necessarily have to know like every single thing about instruction to be a good instructional leader. I do think they need to think about skill, will, and mindset, right? So what are the teacher moves, leader moves you need to see, right? How do you make sure if a person knows how to do those moves, they are motivated? Because some folks know how to do it and won't do it, right? Some folks are motivated to do it, know how to do it, but don't believe in the children, right? And so even if I know nothing about how the brain functions, I can certainly say there's evidence that thinking about those three things yields significantly positive results for children, families, and schools. And that's minus knowing science. Like, I can't say specific science about the brain, but I can say I've seen evidence that those things work. Now, knowing more about the brain certainly will help, but I don't think that means you can't be a good instructional leader without having that specific knowledge.
Yeah.
Sharif.
I mean, I agree with that. I think it definitely helps. And I think this is why, aspect of distributed leadership is important. If you're a principal and you have dope science teachers and great math teachers and literacy teachers and, like in all the different courses, it's unlikely you're going to be an expert on every last one of them. But you should have a basic understanding of, are these rigorous questions? And you should study, like part of observing. And this is what Seaton, I think, was even talking about, like having the capacity and the mindset, right? Like, so if before I'm going into a chemistry classroom, I'm not an expert on chemistry, but I can look at like, okay, where are they? What are they doing? What were the students' skills that they struggle with? What did they do well with? And then marrying that, right, before I even go into observe, and then marrying that with just some basic pedagogical understandings of what are good questions? What are the components of a good questions? How does this teacher engage with students? Do they show that they have high expectations? Do they show belief? Do they show that they're building community? Are peers learning from each other? How are they building on each other's answers? Is the teacher just giving answers or just giving notes and saying copy? All of those things like that, you can bring that to the table and have dialogue and pushback and feedback and coaching around all of that, which is still instruction. Without necessarily knowing all the in-depth, right, components. But, it's K-12. So like, you're going to know a lot of the stuff, but you're also obviously going to have, a background in one or two or three of the particular areas. But then this is how the leadership team comes in mind, right? Like, so you're like, hey, you know what? I'm really a humanities background and I know that well. On my leadership team, I want to make sure that I have an amazing STEM person, right? Like has done it. They are a mathematician or a scientist, and they not just know the content, but they know what comes before, what comes after. Hey, this teacher, if you don't get that part right, it's not going to cover some of the things that students don't know. Or, hey, you know what? Students are nailing this, right? Like if I go in, and even if I don't know, I can look around like, hey, what do you expect the students to do? And I'm looking around like, they're getting this. 9 out of 10 of the students have this. Why are you moving so slowly? Pick up the pace. Like they've shown that they understand this. They're mastering it. You don't need to plod through. Challenge, push, accelerate, right? Like all of that is about instruction, all those decisions.
Is
May
part
I
of
add
the
something to that?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
So in hearing Sharif talk about distributive leadership, I'm reminded of this basically a one way to do that. So every individual will have a blind spot or blind spots, right? Just like Sharif said, we all have like things we're good at, which means we all have things we're not good at, right? And so I think one of the essential questions leaders, I believe the most effective leaders must ask themselves is, what is my process for learning about the work? And what is my process for learning about myself as a leader? So if that is the question, and that is a question of themselves, they're going to be hungry to find the answer, which will not live in themselves typically. Like they may have their own reflection, but then it's confirming like, okay, so how am I showing up? And then what's really happening? So if you ask a group of representatives from the building, like, how are we doing? This idea of like, are we missing things about the science of the brain? We have all these great minds in the room to say, I think we're missing this, right? So that means no one needs to know every single thing because all of us are really trying to work together to get to this outcome. But that means the principal or the principal's manager, right, has to be asking this question like, what is my process for learning about the work of myself? And how am I confirming that my own reflection is true? How am I showing up and like living in that constant cycle? I think that will help those things that we're missing come to the surface.
I always hear about the importance of teachers collaborating with each other. Who do principals collaborate with to be better? Like if you have a team of teachers that sit together and talk about data and they talk about the students and they share in my classroom, this works this way, and in your classroom, it works that way or whatnot. It feels like they have a constant support system that helps them be better and to learn. Principals feel a little bit like they're on their own. So who are their people? I heard you say managers, they're managers. Is that like area superintendents might have like 5 principals that they work with and they build collaboration amongst each other?
Or 40.
Or 40?
Like 30.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, it should be probably 4 or 5, but at least the
who can help 40 people?
Well, that's the whole point. Nobody. You didn't ask a question. You made a statement, right?
However, here's what I will say. Right, it's probably going to be a longer game for us to change the ratio of assistant superintendents to principals. But what if assistant superintendents started to see their role and believe mindset that their role is to be the coach and developer of their team? What if assistant superintendents became master workshop developers, right? And so what if every 2 weeks they did a workshop with their principals based on data they're seeing in their 30 schools, and then they do some systematic follow-up? It is not the same as 1 to 5 for sure, but it's certainly like a different way of saying like, oh, well, I'm just going to come in, we're going to walk through, talk about some data, go to community, and I'm going to go to the next school, because that's not really like a strategy aligned to like getting to the actual outcome of instructional leadership and developing your people. And the ratio may never change, right? But I do think there are some ways we can operate differently, and I'm hopeful, right, that schools will start to see if you can outsource a workshop for 40 people, you can get your internal people to be like master trainers so that they can develop their teams.
I think some of them would have to do a little shakeup. I don't know if all those regional soups are equipped to do that, but I do love that idea, because I think that's what great principals end up doing. And you can have different levels of principalship, right? Like, so if you're a new principal, right, like it's a continuum, and then you have veteran principal that has a body of work that shows success, that has moved the needle for student achievement, for teacher achievement, right? Because those are combined, right? Like, you're not a successful teacher if your students aren't, and it's unlikely you're going to be successful as a student if your teachers aren't, right? And so, but if you have principals that do that, and you can help them codify, right, and bring about same thing we talk about with teachers, right? Like, stop asking the great teacher that has this great relationship. Stop just saying, hey, can you take that kid? Can you take that kid? Can you take that kid? No, help them codify what they're doing if they need help with that, and give them the space to lead other teachers and in professional development. Give them space to coach, give them space to mentor, and principals can be the same at that same type of level. But I just don't think, sometimes things are set, they're cast, and they're like just, well, it's cemented, so we can't think differently about anything, right? Like, oh, it's just until we get more money, until racism's gone, like we can't fix nothing, right? What we really need are folks to be more innovative, more creative, more precise with what their outcomes are trying to be. So if you're saying like, oh, we want to prepare students for the world, and your mission, unless you add on there, but we can't do that until then stop acting like that's what your mission is. Because you'll put one thing on your website, but then all the conversations in every meeting is about something else. Like, well, we really can't, we really can't. That seeps through, right? And that's a disease that infects way too many schools and districts.
We got a couple of questions here. I'll go to them. I want to use, and I'm always talking to you guys as a layperson. Because I think, the public needs a deeper understanding, a more sophisticated understanding of what education is when we talk about it. So we don't know all these different positions and who's supposed to do what. We just know that oftentimes it's not working out, or things aren't happening. And our analysis might be a little bit shallow because we don't know the technical parts of this. I will say, back in my retail days and in my sales days, there was always the people that they would bring in to come and tell us what the numbers should be and what our goals should be. And you need to be selling this much. And you need to, when you're interacting with the public, you need to be suggestive selling in this way, or blah, blah. And I used to have an attitude about that. I used to be like, don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me. Stop telling me about how you had this great sale this one time where you got a woman to buy everything in the store and blah, blah. Don't tell me about it. Come show me. Come work with us for a day and come take over my and I'll watch you. Let me shadow you being great and awesome, because you have all these stories about the way that you were able to conquer the world with these skills you're telling us to do. And you know what? Till one, they all had these great stories where they landed this whale, but they could never come in and show you. They could never actually do it. So
modeling, right?
Modeling, don't, because you know what? Modeling it goes a long way to teach somebody something. If you just bringing me PowerPoints and saying, you smile 4 times, say their name 4 times over, and all these weird kind of things they're telling you to do. And if you fail, they'll tell you, well, maybe you didn't say her name 4 times in the sale. Nah, bro, you come down here, you come sell some things, and then, and I'll follow you. I'll follow your lead. It feels that way in education. You have principals who honestly probably couldn't take over your classroom for a day. Or, if they're going to be evaluating you, I think it would make you trust them more if you thought that they were a really great teacher themselves. Like if you really thought, they're ahead of me, like they could mentor me. Anyways, there's a question here. What is the role of a principal on a school and network district level? For example, zero civics, social studies for students, field trips, prep. I don't know what this question is really asking. I don't know if y'all do either. So questioner with this question, let's come back to it because I'm going to need a little clarity on that one. I'm not tracking. But there's another question from the same person here that says, appreciate the conversation. What avenues or strategies would you employ as a principal to navigate central office when your core curricula doesn't reflect the needs and the rights of our communities?
You know what? Listen, I think one, just we use this word a lot at the center because I'm trying to get better at it, but it's around clarity. So some people have clarity within themselves about like what they believe, what their values are, North Star, I think, but also, communicating that. And I think one thing about, things like curriculum, I just wonder at times, like, yes, a district may have a curriculum, and if it is harmful to children, I just think that, and I was a principal in 2 different schools, and a lot of folks like, oh, you're at a charter, so you had autonomy. I was a principal in the district school, and I felt like sometimes I had even more autonomy because my regional supervisor had probably 40 principals. I don't know how many he had, but, I think when you have that type of clarity and that there's a curriculum that's lacking, I think that's when you come together with your team of teachers who are teaching that content, like, hey, what's missing? And as a principal, part of your role is like to remove barriers, to get the rocks out of the way so that teachers can run faster and further, which means how far students can go. So I don't know if I would spend all of my time fighting a district to change something. I think, you have to continue to raise your voice and do that. But there are some energy, you just got to do it. You just got to change things. You got to implement things. You got to do things. I think if you spend all your time, barking at whoever, when you have a whole army of folks right there next to you, proximity to you, that would be probably willing, if you engage them and said like, hey, here's what I believe. Here's what I'm seeing. What do you believe? If there's a match there, there's nothing like that. And so I would say a big part of the instruction, there's culture too. So I think culture in your building plays a huge role in how you mitigate some of those issues.
I do want to drill down just on the question, though, push it further, because it does feel like some principals are better than others at blocking and tackling from central office.
Yeah.
And teachers do complain a lot about having a weak principal, one who just does whatever the central office tells them to do versus one who protects teachers and defends educators. Dr. Seaton, I'm sorry, you were jumping in on there. I just wanted to make sure, like, to go deeper on this person's question.
Yeah, that's part of the coaching and stuff that a principal could get too. What you got, Doc?
So I think that, when I think back on Ameki and me and principals in the same network, our school demographic was very similar, socioeconomics very similar. Sharif was much more of a trailblazer. Like, he was much more of a, like, I ain't asking. Very much, right? And I remember being like, I remember thinking like, they will be wearing these t-shirts. I wish I could remember an exact slogan I saw, but I used to be like, the whole school has on these t-shirts, and whereas me, and I would definitely say some of it was central office was in my building, so they were constantly just aware and giving me feedback. I also think there's like my history or lack of history with like liberatory education, and so I was much more like not as trailblazer-ish. I think I also think as a Black woman, I would say we're both Black, right? But as a woman, I certainly think I was treated differently. I was treated much more like Sharif is scary. If anybody's met him face to face, he looks like he could punch through a wall. I've always told him, even people on my team would be like, look at the size of his wrist. They used to whisper in trainings like, wow, he probably could. Whereas I'm a woman, right? And so I do think there is something about optics. I do think there is something about most of our central office that managed us were white men. And so they come and talk to me. I'm a woman, right? And so whatever we can say about, no, we're all the same. We see each other the same. No, we don't. Then they go talk to Sharif, who's real like, thanks. And then he just goes, and does his thing, right? So I think there's something about like how people regard our identity elements and how we regard, like there's that interaction sometimes that I think, not to say it excuses us from acting or not acting. I just know for me, that was a real thing where I felt like it was a bunch of men just sort of like telling me what I should or shouldn't do. But what I will say, so I wanted to say that, but I will also say that there are always, I'll say often, always and never don't really work, but there are often inroads to making change that may not be the central office saying, holistically, we're going to make this change, right? So just like Sharif was saying, there are already folks there who are ready to do this. So I think some of it is around like, where are the openings right now? And I think as a leader, getting crystal clear on being culturally responsive is not just the curriculum. It is not. It is how we engage with people. It is what we believe about children. It's what we believe about families. It's how we give feedback. There's so many things. It's the expectations we have of children, of ourselves, right? So yes, curriculum matters. Certainly like what children see and the pictures they see and the language they hear in textbooks matter. Certainly like questions matter, but also Common Core. People critique that, but Common Core is super rigorous. I believe it's culturally responsive in terms of rigor, not in terms of some other elements. So I just want to say like, even if the curriculum doesn't change tomorrow, and that's a long game, there are certainly things we can do right now. And I'll say one more example. So when we worked together, we didn't have African-American history. And I remember
I was going to bring that up. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember being like, where do we live? Right. First of all the children. Right. And so I remember like trying to champion that. And I got so frustrated. And so my lesson would be, yes, we eventually got African-American history. Absolutely. But the other part was like, what opportunities did I miss? Right. And like a more holistic understanding of what it means to be culturally responsive in my own work, my own thinking, my own whatever, in addition to pursuing changing the curriculum. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and the last thing I'll say is I think I could have done a better job, and this is just my own reflection, and I shouldn't have had to, but I think part of my strategy could have been being super clear in writing and prioritizing why this is important. Because sometimes I was so passionate, and honestly, white men didn't always hear that, right? And so it's like, how do you speak the language where your message will be received? Not that we should have to, we should not have to, right? But that's racism. But like, it's like, what's your end game? Get there. And if the strategy is, I need to do a PowerPoint, I need to collect some data, I need to talk to families, I need to do it, and also find the other ways that you can influence and be a culturally responsive leader as you're working on this other stuff.
You know, I think that mindset really quickly is just so it's so important.
I mean, y'all killing me because this sounds like I don't want this job. I think you talking people out of the job right now.
Like, we need warriors in these spaces.
You do, but who's going to be able to? Okay, so because I know on another show, one of y'all is going to say to me, teaching's the toughest job in the world. Blah, blah. Sharif, you and I went back and forth about this, and I'm like, you always like, well, teaching's one of the hardest jobs in the world. And I'm like, you know what? Try having those skills in a capitalist society. That's the hardest job in the world. So all these kids that you turning out who graduate without what they need, they're getting the hardest jobs in the world. You have a pension. You have you have 3 months off when you want it. You have every holiday known to man off when you want it. You turning out. You have a safety net. You're turning out kids that are not going to be able to compete in a capitalist society that is ruthless, has no care or concern. What they care about are skills talk, and everything else walks, right?
Yeah.
But That's not the rant I wanted to go on. If teaching is
yes, you did, but go ahead.
If teaching is the hardest job in the world, now you're saying there needs to be this other position who knows how to teach and knows how to be an instructional leader, but also knows how to be a strategy person and a manager, a business manager, and a facilities person, and a culturally responsive expert, an expert on culturally responsive environments, cultures, classrooms, and teaching. This person sounds like Transformers. Like, you pulled all different kind of cars together.
Wait, so you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, y'all. Go ahead, y'all.
So here's the thing, though, right? Like, if you think about any role, it is not like when you're in that role, you're doing one thing and it doesn't connect to other things. So being a manager, a coach, and a leader, there's overlap. Like, people use strategy all the time. So it's not as if we're saying, okay, now develop strategy when we've never had it. Yes, I will say being a principal is a super hard job. It is. It's also super rewarding, right? Because you get to see these young people and like teaching. You just get to see this community of folks rallying around children. And the way I believe the way we change the game in the country is through spirituality and education, right? Everybody's not going to have a spiritual experience, but every child, for the most part, will be in a school. And so like, that's the way we change the game. And so I just think like, yeah, it's hard. So what? Like, lots of things are hard, right? Like I'm sure being a parent is hard. I'm sure being a wife and a husband is hard, right?
That's right.
The other thing I'll say is, I think a key strategy that principals and actually every single leader and probably teachers need to is how to prioritize, right? I think there's always going to be 1,000 things to think about. And every year we want to win at 1,000 things. But I think if we get clear on what's my 5-year, 7-year, and I was saying this, I think, before the show started, what's my 5-year, 7-year? And then what are the 3 to 4 things we need to nail this year? Not that we're not doing the other parts of our job, but it's like, what are these overarching themes we got to think about this year so that next year we're adding up to the 5-year? And I don't think that principals are well trained in that. And I don't think that leaders in general are well trained in that, but that's certainly an opportunity to make this huge thing much more digestible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would, what I wanted to say is very similar, like this idea that, teaching, they're not like these, there's some discrete skills, it's a continuum, but a teacher is a leader. Like, the great teachers are leaders automatically, right? And so the great ones, I ain't saying every last one, but if there's a great teacher, there's no way in the world they are not a leader, not only within that classroom, but they also have, even if it's not positional authority, but other people are coming and say, how do I do this? What do I do? They're doing coaching, but it's like through conversation. It's through, hey, I'll come by and check out your room. Oh yeah, let's grade these papers together. Oh, let me give you feedback on the feedback that you gave students, right? Like, and so what you're doing then is really enhancing that, right? Like it's almost like having an internet, what do they call it? A booster, right? Like you have an internet there, then you have a booster in another room if the signal is weak. That's kind of how teacher leaders are automatic. And I hate that term because it's redundant. However, like that's what they represent. So then if they become principals, like it's the same thing, but teacher leaders, they're influence culture. They're sharing like next door neighbor. Even and particularly this is when Seaton brings up like this cultural responsiveness. I so much agree about like it's not stuck just in curriculum. Because right now people are running around, oh, this book, that book, oh, let's have book clubs, let's do that, right? But Philadelphia has Black history as a curriculum, as mandatory for graduation. Do we believe that everybody who's teaching that course is actually using it as the lever that it could be, the lever that it should be? Nah. So a curriculum could be anything. If the mindset is jacked up, or the person delivering that curriculum, it doesn't matter. If the curriculum is jacked up, but this person has precise understanding of liberatory education and what this means, then it's a different ballgame. I'd much rather have a weak curriculum and an exemplary teacher. Shouldn't have to choose, but if I have to, I'd rather have a weak curriculum and an exemplary teacher as opposed to an exemplary curriculum and a weak teacher.
I was about to say that's kind of like saying I'd rather have socks than shoes or shoes than socks. But then I realized in Philly, a lot of y'all brothers don't wear socks.
Listen,
So,
that's Will
so,
Hayes and
that's
Ray
right. A lot of
Fields
y'all
and
younger
Raymond
brothers out
Roy
there.
Pace and Grimes. Like they out here with loafers and no socks on. I don't understand that. If I ain't got socks on, I got flip flops on or something. I ain't got no hard dress shoes. I don't understand that. Bow ties and dress shoes and ankles. You know what I mean?
I wanted to bring this up real quick because I actually realized as we were talking, I wasn't real clear on the demographics of principals in the United States. It seemed to me that I've always saw research that said
right?
that principals were actually more diverse than teachers were, but not by far. When I pull it up here and take a look between 1999 and 2000 versus 2017 and 2018, there was actually a kind of like a freeze for Black principals. It was the same in all those years. It was 11%. Hispanic went up but from 5% to 9%, and then every other race, like 1%. Asian, Pacific Islanders don't even rank enough to have numbers. 1%, two races or more, or so largely being a principal in the United States is still largely, I mean, look at this, 78% of the principals are still going to be white, and it's more evenly split, it feels like, between male and female. So maybe a little better than teachers, but if we're expecting them to be cultural, I mean, well, yeah, if we're expecting them to be instructional leaders and get culturally relevant pedagogy, it doesn't feel like the stock of principals that we have are any more better situated than teachers are to be able to get that and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times, and another piece that's really interesting in that is, the amount of teachers who are women, but in that leadership role, and Seaton hinted toward this a little bit, men some kind of way shoot up, so even though the ground for drawing principals is, men are at a distinct minority, but, by the time it becomes to leadership, it looks different, right? And so that's also something to really probe and look into. And when Seaton used to share about her experiences of being a principal, and I think, as she mentioned, like we all are some of our experiences, and that's what we bring to tables. But it was always interesting when she would relay some of her experience as being a Black, woman, in these spaces, right? And like just what that means, what was the responsibility with a staff that was majority women, but supervisors who were mostly men, and so like, what does that dynamic look like and feel like, right? Because I think a lot of times principals, when you talked about like, oh, some principals are able to support it in different ways, often it's like that little, that little hourglass, right? And like the principal's in the middle. Right. Like if you play Scrabble, you go with the sand and it's going down, and the middle part is this narrow part. And you have this principal that's trying to all these directives, messages, PowerPoints and Excel, for folks who only lead with Excel sheets, but not like with the people. Right. And then you're trying to protect your community, your ecosystem. And you may get messages that are, anti-Black, and like, OK, how am I going to like address this and make sure my folks are good, right? Like that is all the things that are going on as you're learning, as you're leading, as you're building relationships with the community. So yeah, it's an extremely complex job, and it's not for the faint-hearted or the folks with lack of the spirit to do that, right? And I think number one thing is to lead with humility, because then at that point you understand, like, okay, here's my Achilles heel, here's my blind spot, and this is how I'm going to construct my team. But if you're not honest with yourself about the school's needs, right? The school's needs are probably going to be what your needs are, what your Achilles heel is the most. That's what you need, and that's how you build your team, right? And there's no such thing as the Superman principle. There are super teams, or it's nothing.
Can I give you a real world scenario for a principal?
Mm-hmm.
Here's a real world scenario. So a principal called me and a couple of other activists into a meeting just to tell us what was going on in the school and how the district was treating the school. Minneapolis, the north side of Minneapolis, is the part of Minneapolis that has been blighted over time. It's the more Black part of the city. It's the more it's the part of the city where housing values and everything have been neglected.
Why is that such a theme across America?
Well, I mean, I think every city has, it's either the north side or the east side of San Jose, or the, like, you know, like every side has its side. Every city has its side, whatever it is. It might be east, north, west, south, but you got one. You got a side, right? So in Minneapolis, north side is where the George Floyd tragedy happened, where the killing happened, where you have the memorial, and that part of town is the last part of town to get its streets swept, snow removed, responses to complaints about various things that are living issues about how you live or whatnot. But so the schools, even on that side, the principals on that side of town, in my estimate, have been treated very differently. So when they make a demand in that part of town, it's not the same as when a principal down in Southwest Minneapolis makes a demand, right? For instance, and they're treated differently by central office. So anyways, principal called us in, popular principal from the north side. And as we were talking, she just mentioned one thing that none of the activists that were with us could let go. So it was a K-8 school. And there's a difference in our K-8s and our regular elementary schools. And what she was finding was every day her eighth graders were hungry all the time. And it turns out that the district was giving that school the same lunch proportions and breakfast proportions to the eighth graders that they were given to the kindergartners. Right. So in other parts of the district, if you're in kindergarten through, like, whatever, the lower grades, you get a certain breakfast lunch. And if you're in the higher grades, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, you get a different proportion. But for this school, they were giving everybody the kindergarten proportions. And when she brought it up, they told her to shut up about it. Don't make no noise about it or whatnot, which was one of the reasons. So we were there like, so let me get this right. Literally.
Explain that again. Like,
yeah, we were like, y'all literally giving kindergarten portions to eighth graders and not knowing why you're having discipline issues in the afternoons, and you don't know why these kids are hungry and acting out. And their response to you is, you better, if you know what's good for you, is to kind of keep it under wraps. Now, as I understood it, we made a little bit of noise about it, and it kind of embarrassed them a little bit, but they didn't actually change it until she started working with the principal in one of the white schools in the good part of town, who was known for being able to get whatever he wanted out of the district because he had white parents. He had the parents with the power or whatnot. So he was kind of like the golden principal or whatnot. When I see things like that, it just makes me think that, like, you couldn't last as a principal if that's the way your district, if you were a true revolutionary and you are truly about equity, you couldn't last in a role like that for long without, one, just shutting up and doing what you're supposed to do and just letting it roll, or two, quitting, like leaving the role, leaving the job, and just being like, I'm done with this. Who needs that type of a problem?
There's
and
a third way.
Huh? Well,
There's
actually,
a third way.
What's the third? Tell me, what's the third way? How yeah, help me out, brother. What's
Like
the
what?
third way?
I mean,
do tell.
I mean, I love that you started off earlier saying questions and statements. I think you made the statement. I think the principal showed a third way. The principal is being a strategist. It reached out to the community with you all, but also, just like, how do I, at the end of the day, it's not checkers, it's chess, right? Like, everybody talking about like ball is life. No, chess is actually life, right? And so what do you want to get accomplished? And how do you do it? I don't think she has to quit. I think yes, and it's so interesting because we were texting this morning with a group of principals, colleagues, this morning, and we were talking about just some of this work, like that it is extra work. To be a conscious principal is extra work, just like it's extra work to be conscious and dedicated to the community and for justice in any role you can imagine. If you're in that role, it is extra work, and some folks call it the invisible tax, and it should not be, and that's what exists. That's what racism does. That's what white supremacy, that we can either say, hey, I'm quitting and I'm gonna find a place less racist. Yes, you can do that. And there are kids there, right? And so what she did was she was a strategist. She's like, you know what? They listen to him. And if I have I'm going to hold him accountable for his privilege, right? Like, I'm going to hold him accountable. If you're all this, like, oh, all Black Lives Matter, and yeah, we want to be all right, so here, check this. This is what you're going to do for me, right? Like, and which means
I get us. That in a way. Okay, so that
but
is
you do way? That. You do that over and over and over and over again, all the different times. Seaton, what you got?
Yeah, Dr. Seaton, you jump in here.
Bring some
Because I don't like Sharif's answer at all. So go ahead.
So I'm gonna say two things, and so this has actually been I want to say two things, and this is one thing that's been on my heart as we're doing like workshops and even from previous experiences. But I'll start with, I have two things. I'll start with the first. I actually think it's okay to quit, right? And I think the question has to be, what is my best service? And I don't always think that staying in the role for every individual, like I left, right? Because for me, it was like my last straw. I was in a conversation with my supervisor and he was so disrespectful to me. And I thought to myself, how much more as a human being am I going to take, right? And so I made a decision to leave, but I didn't leave the work. I left the role and I left that network. And I think it is honorable. And I actually think every person every year should ask themselves, is this my best service, right? Like, because some people stay in there burned out, they're disinterested, they don't want to be there, and they're just trying to get to the next thing. And then we hurt children, we hurt ourselves. And I actually just don't think that's, I think there is like a more humane way to think about like our commitments. And when folks leave, lots of folks who left the principalship have left and they are still in the fight. Like, I'm working for the center. I'm not a principal, but I am absolutely advocating for the same kind of thing I was advocating for before. So I will say, like, I think there's some honor in asking that question. And like, I also think there's some honor in the thing I wish I had done differently, though, is before I left, I wish I had been honest about why I was leaving. I didn't think anybody would listen. And then the same person who has done things to me, I've heard stories about them doing things to other people. And I ask myself, did I not do my work to help protect somebody else, right? And so like, those are all questions we have to ask, and we don't always have the energy to speak up, but I don't think it's just sticking there. We all have to make like the choice for ourselves. Everybody's choice is different. And I'm not saying quit.
Come through, Dr. C.
But I'm not saying quit. I'm saying ask yourself, what is your best service, right?
Yeah,
the other thing I'll say is, I will say the biggest thing, one of the biggest things, because it's probably 17, one of the biggest things I think people need. Sharif, what you laughing at?
You just said it could be 17. I'm gonna give you this one.
It could be 17. I think one of the biggest things, and I am hesitant to say this.
Good, say it.
One of the biggest things I think we need to really like think about is navigating white women's tears. And because we keep talking about privilege and navigating white people's discomfort. Like what I think, because that, like those numbers you showed about the majority being female and the majority being white, whatever the majority is will dictate the culture and direction if somebody doesn't say, is this the right direction? I think the hardest part is, what do we do when like the folks in power, the parents who will complain the most, the folks, when they are the loudest voice and they are uncomfortable and they expect to be affirmed and they expect to be comfortable. So I'm gonna share a quote with you. So we do these workshops and we have heard the literally same language from white people, right? Like literally
across the country.
Saying to somebody black, like a black person said, like, hey, I really want to have an affinity group. I want to talk about stuff in my own space. We've been with all these white people. I feel like I need more. White person says, I understand you want a safe space. I also want to hear so that I can learn. And I feel like I'm stuck because every time I say something, it's like it's not working, or people make me feel like I should be silent, right? Literally, when I tell you the same language, I was like, are they friends? Same language, different workshops, different times. And and so this
different states.
Different states. And the thing is, these themes have been consistent from not my time as a principal, probably from, Jim Crow, like same themes. Like, I want to be comfortable, teach me, right? Like, help me. I'm asking these, and then cry, literally tears. And so then, and I heard a person of color say, and thank you. They were like, it's okay. Like you'll be fine. And what I thought about, so I did a role play with the team member because we were trying to figure out, how do we navigate this conversation, right? And so I played the role of the white female. And so even as I was playing the role, I was saying the language that was written to one of our team members around, like, I feel stuck no matter what I do. And I thought, I wonder if this is how Black men feel about police. Like, I literally thought, like, I'm driving down the street, and no matter what I do, that police car represents something to me that probably is not represented to any other ethnic group in the country in the same way. And I thought about, what if we who are not Black men, what if we who are not people of color, what if we who have more privilege, learn to just sit in our discomfort? And there's a yoga principle that says, when you feel discomfort in a pose, right? You hold, you breathe, and you ask yourself what comes up for you. Ooh. As opposed to telling somebody else, teach me, Black person, teach me, Native American, teach me, because I need to learn that when I ask a question and you don't affirm me, you made me feel. It's like, sit in your discomfort and what comes up for you. And I think if leaders started to learn, let them sit in that. It is not your responsibility to change how they feel. People of color, you do not have to teach them, because you're caring enough. White people sit, and especially white women, when you cry, learn to sit in that. And then ask yourself, how am I even developing empathy for people who feel like this every day? Last thing I'll say is, when white people leave this space of discomfort, right, of the training, the workshop, the difficult conversation, they still leave with white privilege. When the Black person, the Black man, the Native American, when they leave, they still leave and go into a racist society. So when people feel like, well, I feel bad, they feel that way, it's literally for a moment, right? We live our life. So I will stop talking now, but I just want to say, like, those are things I think we should think about. Like, it's like arming ourselves with, how do I navigate this? How am I as a leader just becoming comfortable with, this is not my job to make you comfortable? And part of the people development really is, you need to sit in that. And I need to support people of color who are always told to teach other white people about their experience and carry more of a burden. But that's a leadership. Leaders need to learn that. And principals, managers need to empower them to do that.
I love that. I mean, that text chain that we were on this morning talking about, part of the conversation was this article that came out in the Boston Globe that centers this Black man, Malcolm, in it. And the title, Chris, this is what I think I texted you this morning, but it's basically the exhaustion of being a Black teacher in a school. When you're the one and only, right? Like, just the exhaustion. And whether you're a teacher, leader, whether you're administrator, just what that exhaustion is. And particularly when you're talking about the context that Dr. Seaton just raised, that is about as persistent as the sun rising the next morning in our schools and other spaces. And I think it's absolutely crucial. In one scene in this article, Malcolm, tells a Zoom room full of white administrators, I'm sick of cleaning up y'all shit. I'm not going to do it anymore. Right? Like, that was the level of frustration. And they said his wife turned to him, because she rarely hears him talk like that, because he's so gentle and even keel. But he was you could just see just the frustration, the fatigue, the trying to address the system, and having to go out and deal with George Floyd in the street as a human being and as another Black person, and having to fix the nonsense that's going on within schools. All of that is complexity. And I just do want to say, like, I'm not disagreeing about, like, when to walk away, right? Like, that is absolutely that, like, I would never disagree with that. I think, you talked about spirituality earlier. I agree with that. Like, the reflection that has to happen as educators, as human beings, but particularly when you are working with other people's children, that is vital. And when you feel like, you know what, I can no longer do what I promised, like that, I was always big on, we made promises to communities. And when I feel like I can't do that anymore, I can't deliver on a promise, I'm gonna work to try to figure it out. But at some point I have to say, you know what, I'm not delivering on a promise that I made to community, but also to myself. Right. And so I think that, that understanding, I'm just saying, like, there's complexities as far as like how we get things done. And, you talk about that Black history, like, we at some point, Seaton and I say, you know what, F it, we're going to do this on our own. Right. Like, that's another example of just like a third way. We kept going back and forth. Oh, this is important. Oh, this. And at some point we did that. Right. I think that is part of responsibility, raising up the conversation, having it and saying what we believe, because for so often we couldn't do that. We had to do that within our own cabins and corners. And that still happens a lot. So when we do have a platform, when we do have a angle, we should do it. And at some point we're like, we're going to do this anyway, because this is what our children deserve. And these are the promises that we made.
I love all of these points. We landed, I think, in a profound place. I think the question of everybody is this the highest and best use of myself? Is this what God has put me here to do? And if the answer to that is no, and if you ask yourself that on New Year's Eve every night, or any day of the night, on your birthday, or on Christmas every year, or whatever, am I being used for my highest purpose, my highest potential, my highest gifts? Is this what God would have me do? And the answer to that is no. Then that should tell you a lot about what you should be doing for that next year. Right. And sometimes people quit and stay, which is it's a particular education problem. People do that often. Quit and stayers are not good people for the system. They really aren't. After a while, they compound their antipathy and their kind of laziness compounds, and it's bad for students, bad for children overall. I also watched some of the comments as you guys were talking. I grew up on Jesse Jackson, so I have a way of remembering things by things that rhyme. So I was like thinking. So Elaine Wells said that the white women cries and the white man sighs in these schools. And I thought that is so true. Like you have the tears and the criers, and then you have the ones who roll their eyes and like, oh, not this diversity stuff again, or not this again. And there's power in being able to sigh at other people's pain, or cry at other people's pain. And what they often will do together, when you mix those two together, they will deny also that it's them, or that it's a problem, or that it's systemic, or that it's racism. And what Black people need to do is live in why. Why are you crying? Why are you sighing? Why are you not seeing the lies? Right? So we got lies and cries and sighs and denies, and we gotta be asking why.
All right,
there you
Jesse.
go.
I hear you, Jesse.
There you go. Wrapping it up for the people today. But I do think, I'm being flippant, but I do think there is something to that. The way Elaine, talked about how one will have the tears, the other will do the, oh my God, not this again, with the sighs and whatnot. And those are powerful postures. That posture, if you multiply that over many teachers doing those two things, actually can spell doom for our kids, right? Because that means, number one, they're stunted in their growth. They're never getting to where you need them to be true teachers and instructors for our children, right? They're stuck in they're stuck on step 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the frustration with people of color, and Dr. Seaton, I don't know, final word on this maybe. The frustration of people of color in systems like that is, we're not here to be your teachers or help you get over yourself. And as a matter of fact, we're here for the kids, but you're making it hard for me to even want to do that, when I realize how behind the curve some of the rest of y'all actually are. So you're asking too much of me. You just called it attacks, Sharif. This discussion is another testament in why so many people quit. For me, like, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking why the average person would probably walk out on a bunch of this stuff right now. It's too much.
Yeah.
And we see the attrition rates for Black teachers is higher. Like, we see it. Go ahead, Doc.
I mean, what I would just say is, and I will say, I have certainly shifted in my own perspective about this, even this year, because I've heard folks say, I've heard white people ask these questions, and I'm thinking, then I've heard Black people say, well, my job's not to teach you. And then I struggle with, well, how do we then, right? If they're finally asking, but then
You just muted yourself. Can you say that again?
Then in my own reflection, I thought, like, it isn't our responsibility to teach. And I think Black people need to give themselves permission to say, sit in your discomfort. It is not my responsibility to teach you. And just be okay with that. Knowing that the tears will probably still come. People will still ask. But I think it's about us saying, that's not my problem to solve. And just being okay with that, right? Close your door, do your job. Unless I'm your manager, it is not my problem to solve. Yeah.
Sharif, what would you say? And Dr. Seaton, I just want to say, like, I don't want to just say yeah and move on to El Mekki here. Everything you have said today has been, to me, like, insightful and profound. Like, these final pieces, if you're on the outside looking in and you have just demystified for people some of what goes on the inside. And I think that's all of our job. All of our job is to actually make sure the public is getting more and more sophisticated in their understanding of what really goes down in schools. So El Mekki,
Yeah.
what's your final words of wisdom, Farmer Mekki?
Yeah, and you said something. I just want to address it at the start of the show. You don't need land to feed yourself. You can start honeybees on your roof.
Oh, stop
They
it.
need a spot about like between, 15 inches by 15 inches, and that is enough space. So, but anyway, let me get back to the topic. I think part of the privilege that we, white privilege to be specific, that we are continuously bumping up against is that there's been a long legacy, historic and punitive legacy of, when Seaton says, "Oh, it's not our responsibility to teach," like they've always had free access to our brains and bodies. And so for them to even contemplate that they do not deserve your thoughts, your action, your lessons for them, for their benefit, is, like, I don't think a lot of them folks can digest it. I don't feel like a lot of white educators can digest that without really deep thinking and pushing, because they just like, what do you mean? It's almost an affront that, for someone to say like, no, sit in your discomfort. And so I think that's why it's even more important for more Black people to say that, right? Like, and then another thing, they not only do they want it, and they think they are, just entitled to it. They also feel like they're entitled to it for free. Like give me a workshop, and no, I don't want to pay you. Like, this is like, I have the privilege of not paying. Like, I haven't paid for any of your talents over the past 400 years. What the hell? I'm gonna start paying you for your talents now. So like, I think all of that is something that we really need to really push and challenge. And I want to read a quote from Dr. Davis Dixon that was in that article, about that school experience. And he talks about this invisible tax on Black teachers and teachers of color. And what he says is like they end up shouldering, and we're talking about Black teachers, Black educators, they end up shouldering a lot of responsibilities that other folks just don't have to. And then there's the psychological cost where you are forced to live the trauma of racism and systemic oppression while being the face of changing that within the school too. Right. And so that is like, can be overbearing, overwhelming, and just really just feel it punishing, to, have to live it and fix it at the same time. And we know that there are just so many Black educators who are educators of color who are doing that, who are pushing through, who are challenging. And what we need are that 80% around the country, whether it's principals or teachers who identify as white, like you all have to step your game up in a profound way, and a profound way, like a way like, that's never been before, right? Like, all the people are like, oh, we just need to go back. There is no going back. Like, we need to look ahead, and at the same time, we have to build our own institutions again so that there are safe spaces that we can actually see, like, what does it feel like to be in a school with an optimal environment for Black success, both student and educator. Like we need that again. And we need to kind of really reimagine. And then lastly, I would say, you all, the audience, I'm always glad when, Dr. Seaton can come on, a show like this and really, so folks can hear like just the gift and talent. And this is like the professional learning experiences that she's been leading on our team, not only for, whether they're ninth graders in high school or they're veteran educators and leaders. This is the stuff that she brings to the table as our chief learning officer and really an architect on how to develop, Black educators and as Chris Emden said, and the rest of y'all too.
On that note, I want to make sure that I highlight the Center for Black Educator Development is the organization that Sharif and Dr. Seaton are building. They do national work. Anybody listening or watching should go check out their website. I am sure that there is a way in which everybody needs the center. Like the help. Every district has some form of need of improving in the areas of how we develop, support, prepare teachers to be great for our students and for our young people. So many of us who are lay people, we're always having to ask ourselves, what is our role in helping this work and be better for our children? And one of the roles you can play is to support the people who are actually doing the work to fight it out, fight the good fight for our kids. The people like Dr. Seaton and Sharif, the farmer. So let's make sure that we do a good job of supporting on this weekend, as I started the show with. And I don't know how what everybody watching or listening, what your spiritual affiliation is, but it's today is Good Friday and it is Easter weekend. It's spring. It's the time of renewal. It's the time of rethinking our position within nature and the ecology of the world. All of us have a role to play. There's something that we can do. These jobs we have talked about in this hour are tough. In some ways, they're demanding, especially for people of color, in ways in which you should not have to experience alone. So one thing that we can do, number one, is wake up every day thankful and praying for those people within education who are fighting for the intellectual development of our children who have been marginalized for far too long. And we can go beyond praying. Praying is a good start. Praying and spiritual support and making sure that we keep in mind and keep these folks in our hearts as a good start. That's breakfast. The lunch and the dinner is also finding ways that we can be material supporters of their work in terms of actually providing the resources that we have. Black folks have been famous in history for pulling together their dimes, their nickels, their quarters to make sure that their educators were taken care of and fortified to do the job that we need them to do. So let's not just be breakfast people. Let's be lunch and dinner people too. We're not broke physically or morally. So let's give all that we can. Let's pray for our educators who are fighting the good fight. Let's provide them the resources that they need and the fellowship, the moral support, the ways in which we can rally around them so that they don't feel alone, alienated, living in these jobs, doing it every day, feeling thankless. So that's my wrap on all of this. Dr. Seaton, Farmer El Mekki, thank y'all for another wonderful Freedom Friday. I appreciate y'all and everybody watched and listened. I appreciate you too. Given any amount of your time throughout the week to listen to conversations about education, which are not actually, we don't have enough of them. The interest level is not high enough. So for any of you that do this,